Welcome to CivilNet. I'm Sareen Habeshian. With me today is Aleksey Petrosyan, the project director at Transparency International Anti-Corruption Center in Armenia. Alex has participated in a number of local, parliamentary, and presidential elections as an observer. He is here today to talk about how Transparency International will be monitoring the upcoming parliamentary elections on Sunday. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting.
Of course. The elections are in 2 days. How is Transparency International preparing?
Yeah, actually we started preparations in summer yet. For that purpose, we have founded a coalition called Ագանատես, which means eyewitness, which is involving not only Transparency International Anticorruption Center, but also Journalist Club Asparez and Restart Students Initiative, whose major goal was to have the short-term observation of Yerevan City Council elections, as well as long-term and short-term observation of the parliamentary elections in that we will be having on Sunday. Actually, the observation started in November with the long-term observers. We trained and deployed 35 long-term observers in all 38 territorial electoral districts in Armenia, who were until today we're doing the observation of the pre-election period in Armenia. The major focus of the pre-election period was the election administration process, pre-election campaign, work of the different electoral commissions, voter lists, as well as meeting relevant stakeholders like police, party offices, election offices, other local media and observers. So today we have summarized the data received from long-term observers and published a preliminary report on the pre-election period. And yes, for the Sunday we plan to have an observation, short-term observation of the voting process. For the observation we will have around 300 polling stations covered by the coalition. Why 300 polling stations? Actually, just want to outline that for the first time in Armenia we'll be applying a special methodology for observation called sample-based observation, which is unique for Armenia, and the major uniqueness of this methodology and technique is that it will not only focus on the violations during the E-Day, but it will also allow to assess the quality of polling station workers, assess the entire electoral process, starting from the polling stations setup, vote preparation, till the voting process and vote counting and tabulation at both polling stations and district electoral commissions. Observers will be reporting on the defined times during the day through the standardized forms on the specific aspects of the electoral process.
You mentioned the pre-electoral study. What were some of the most significant findings?
One of the most significant findings was that in comparison to the previous parliamentary elections in 2017, the pre-election campaign period was mostly calm. This year it was more competitive environment, enabling all participants to providing all participants equal opportunities for competition. This was the general assessment, and in terms of the election administration, I would say that mostly the electoral commissions and particularly central electoral commissions fulfilled all the tasks mostly in accordance with the set procedures and the deadlines defined by the electoral code. But however, this time again we had also a number of issues and violations registered and highlighted by our observers. One of the major ones that I would like to highlight, the first one, is related to fake observation that, and we had a statement, public statement 2 weeks ago. By saying we, I mean the coalition. Because when monitoring the accreditation process of non-governmental organizations who applied for the observation missions, we outlined a few organizations that had a high number of observers, list of observers, who, and based on our studies, we found out some connection with the political parties which endangers the impartiality and neutrality of these missions. Thanks to the statement and most part of this organization, the registration of some of organizations was registered. However, there are still 2 organizations which we are doubt to be a fake observer and endanger the observation institution. This is for the fake observation. In case of the pre-election campaign monitoring, I would like to highlight the violations regarding the ensuring the procedures and requirements for distribution of campaign materials. As you may already know, that almost all parties, party alliances and the candidates didn't follow these requirements, and you could find the campaign posters on everywhere, including in places which are prohibited by the law, which could, for example, it could be public buildings, I mean the local government, culture house, hospitals, polyclinics, and our observers provided us with the information and proofs on this. Also, we had on posters on public transport and taxis, which was prohibited, which is also prohibited by the law. Based on these findings, we have already submitted an let's say complaint and a letter to the Central Electoral Commission to notify the relevant parties and the candidates to remove this, to remove the posters and prevent possible further violations of these requirements. In regard to the administrative resources, we also noticed some issues. I would highlight that the let's say most of the violations had an sporadic character and didn't have the any system within it, and weren't coordinated like we witnessed during 2017 elections. Yeah, we had cases when the public servants were participating in the pre-election campaign. Prohibited by the law. We had the cases when the campaign was being done in the public building by the public servants. We had cases of providing the public facilities for the pre-election campaign and other similar things. I think, as far as I remember, I can't recall the entire report now. Anyway, this will be published in the coming hours on the website of the Transparency International and the Coalition's Facebook page, so for details you can refer to that report as well.
You mentioned that some violations were already spotted and the Central Electoral Commission was notified. In that instance, is the Transparency International's work done and to just leave it to them, or is there any follow-up that has to be done?
Actually, the monitoring will follow also on the during the post-electoral period. Based on the violations that we have that we collect, and we will have a group of lawyers who will be in charge of developing complaints to the relevant instances. They will follow up on this issue at the relevant levels, and it may not be only the Central Electoral Commission or Territorial Electoral Commission. It may be also the criminal court, administrative court, where we may submit cases on the violations which were identified not only during the pre-election period but also on the E-Day and during the post-electoral period until the final publication of the final results of the elections.
Can you tell me more about the observers, who they are? Are they all from Armenia? Is there people from outside of Armenia? What are their trainings like?
Yeah, for that purpose, for the purpose of recruitment of short-term observers that will be observing the E-Day, we have received approximately like 1,500 applications. Most of them are people of aged between 18 to 35, mostly young activists. And one of the requirements of the observation mission was to be non-partisan, not to have any party affiliation, and publicly support any political force during this period. So this was done to make sure that the observation process is neutral, impartial, and there is nothing that could be interpreted as a support to any party or candidate during the observation. So based on the applications, we have shortlisted around like around 700 observers that passed the training on the electoral procedures and requirements on the voting process, which covers the day starting from the vote preparation, the session that starts on 7 o'clock, opening of the polling station, voting process, polling station closing, then the counting and vote counting procedures, and compiling the relevant protocols. Also, we also trained on the methodology that I have also already mentioned, this sample-based observation, on the reporting methodology and the reporting forms. And the reporting will be done not only through paper-based, but it will be coordinated through the online platform, which is the coalition is maintaining now. And this will be a web-based platform that will receive an SMS messages and web app reports from observers during the vote preparation, voting process at a set time of the day, at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the evening, and once the vote counting is over.
Do you think voter turnout will be a challenge on election day, given the revolution and the popular support for acting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan that exists?
Speaking from the perspective of the observation mission, our main focus is not the voter turnout, but mostly focus on the ensuring that all activities throughout this electoral cycle are done in compliance with the compliance and requirements of the local regulation. So, if all of these provisions and requirements are preserved, this is like more about the parties to attract the voters to come to the polling station. But from the perspective of the observation mission, we are more estimating the integrity of the electoral process rather than the assessing the legitimate challenges with the voter turnout. So.
Mm-hmm. And when observers, if observers see violations, do they intervene? Are they allowed to intervene, or do they simply document?
There is a set of questions that we summarized in the form questionnaire for observers, which provides detailed instructions for each case. This can be for the opening. It may relate to the safe, where the voting materials are stored. There is let's say questions regarding the quorum of the PEC when starting the session, and there are questions regarding the let's say violations of rights and possible threats, campaigning in and around polling stations, etc., etc. For these elections, we will be focusing mostly on the serious violations, that may have a significant impact on the outcomes of elections. And for those cases, the observers are required not only to document, but also on the day we will have a call center with the critical incident group compiled of lawyers, who will be coordinating with the observers on developing the protocols, on recording the observers, claims and remarks on the election-related violations in the PEC logbook, and developing complaints for the relevant instances. This incidents form will be maintained by lawyers, as I mentioned, for developing the complaints. In addition, for the specific issues, on the different aspects of the voting process, I don't want to go into the details because there is lots of huge list of questions that observers are required to answer, and which is mandatory, which they will answer during the different parts of the day, depending on the process.
And has Transparency International been monitoring campaign finance during these elections?
Yes, similarly, yeah, within the framework of the pre-election campaign, we are also monitoring the pre-election campaign finance of political parties and alliances. For this purpose, the long-term observers are collecting data on the political party expenditures during the pre-election campaign, like the publication of billboards, number of employees at their party offices, etc., which will be compared with their which will be compared with their financial declarations to see any deviations.
And will Transparency International be working to reform the electoral law or to continue reforming?
Yeah, as you may know, after the revolution, there was an initiative to amend the electoral code, and a special committee on amendment of the electoral code was established, and Transparency International was an active member of that. We have developed and provided recommendations for the election code reform, which unfortunately failed to be approved by the Parliament. However, based on those recommendations, as well as on the findings and the recommendations of this observation mission report, we'll be further working with the new government and the Central Electoral Commissions to make these recommendations and reforms come true.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing all this information.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting.
Of course. Thank you for watching CivilNet. I'm Sareen Habeshian. See you next time.